You mentioned in the last segment, Richard, the problem with the timeliness of data. That a lot of agencies or I guess probably state and local governments as well, some reports come out, every week or every month, every year. Sometimes there's a big delay. What other areas have you found in trying to compile data across federal, state, local governments? Which areas do a better job? What are some of the holes that you've found in terms of the availability of the data or the timeliness of the data? And what efforts do you guys, in trying to compile this data every year, you've identified problems? What are some of the solutions that you might see to address some of the data shortfalls?
Yeah, great question. We've been at this for almost a decade at this point. We've just learned so much about the pitfalls of government data, and there are just some big challenges. You mentioned the timeliness is a huge one. There are the mapping between federal, state, and local is a huge challenge. There's no standardization across a lot of these governments. We spent a lot of time during COVID, for example, going and actually trying to gather data from all 50 states, because that just wasn't something the government was set up to do. And the CDC used our data because they didn't have that pipeline set up. So just that lack of connection is a huge issue. On the spending side, it's a challenge. It's hard to see where money from legislation goes. There's been some great efforts like USA Spending and the Data Act to see where spending goes, but it's really hard to track it to legislation, with the exception of a very small couple pieces of legislation. It's hard to actually see where the money is coming from. So if you're a policymaker, you can't really track what the money you spent did, and so that's a big challenge. There's presentation issues. A lot of data is stuck in PDFs within the government. A lot of data just isn't presented at all. It's sort of locked in agencies and not presented in a way that's really digestible. And so those are all things we're trying to do: standardize the presentation format, the visualization of it. And then I will say there's some issues with how data is not used, and I think that takes in decision making, and that I think is going to take a full sort of culture change to get people in legislative positions in Congress to use data when they make decisions. Make that data clear to the American public. And I allow the public to track along with the decisions they've made and the numbers that they use to make them, and then the outcomes that they intended. And then if the outcomes don't fit what the intention was, hold them accountable. And I think this is a huge culture shift that would need to happen towards data-based decision making in Congress.
So in terms of tracking the limitations or the shortfalls of the data, I mean, do you have a place on your website where you say, okay, here are recommendations for change, or here's best practices in some states, and here's what the other states need to do? Or, is there sort of a go-to list of things you found that would could be turned into recommendations for improvement?
Yeah, so in our most recent annual report for government that we did for Congress, we asked them for where they care about data, and then tried to answer questions. Where we couldn't answer their questions, we told them how they could fix it and gave them a list of recommendations for how to improve the data. And so that's what we have right now. We put it out in our report and on our site just last week, actually. But I will say, long term, we're hoping to really start doing what you were just mentioning for states, but for federal agencies, look at which agencies do data well and which ones don't, and try to kind of help understand what best practices would be to make the data best presented and available to the American public. So hoping to do that a little bit later this year.